Alright, let's talk about a story so shocking, literally, that it had the whole neighborhood buzzing like a live wire. Picture this: Grandpa on his porch, iced tea in hand, rocking chair creaking with that steady rhythm only seasoned retirees can master. He's not scrolling Instagram, not binge-watching Netflix. He's just vibing with nature like the porch philosopher he is. But across the street?
Hoa ba trôn.
And let me tell you, these guys weren't your everyday clipboard warriors. No, these folks were so obsessed with community standards they made airport TSA look lazy. And instead of doing the normal logical thing, like knocking on the door, guess what they decided to do?
They climbed the fence.
Yep. They went full Spider-Man, scaling Grandpa's property like they were auditioning for American Ninja Warrior, HOA edition. And here's the kicker: this wasn't the first time. Nope, this was déjà vu with a side of arrogance. They'd climbed his fence before, poking around his yard like unpaid landscapers. But this time? Oh, this time Grandpa was ready. See, Grandpa's not just any old man. He's lived through wars, recessions, Y2K, and the cursed sound of dial-up internet. He's the kind of guy who thinks duct tape can fix just about anything, and 9 times out of 10 he's right. But when the HOA came knocking, or rather climbing, he didn't grab duct tape. He grabbed wires. He electrified the gate.
And then he waited. From the porch.
With the patience of a man who'd seen everything, except this. Now, to really appreciate how we got to the moment where HOA patrol meets suburban shock therapy, we've got to rewind the clock a bit. This wasn't just one random Tuesday gone wrong. This was the result of months, maybe years, of HOA pettiness boiling over like a forgotten pot of spaghetti on the stove. Grandpa had always been that neighbor. You know, the one, friendly, waves to everyone, tells corny jokes at the block party, and brings out a smoker grill that makes the entire neighborhood smell like heaven on a summer day. His only crime?
His fence.
This fence wasn't ugly, it wasn't falling apart, and it definitely wasn't a danger. But it wasn't new. It had a little character.
A weathered look.
You know, the kind of fence that says, "I've seen some things, kid." But to the HOA?
That was a problem.
Because God forbid something in the neighborhood isn't painted beige number 57 with regulation-approved gloss finish. According to them, Grandpa's fence didn't meet updated community standards. So what did the HOA do? They started sending him letters.
Then fines.
Then more letters. The pile on his kitchen counter was taller than a toddler by the time it was all said and done. But when that didn't work, they decided to get hands-on. And by hands-on, I mean climbing the man's fence like they were breaking into Fort Knox. So tell me this: how would you react if people you didn't invite kept climbing into your yard? Would you call the cops?
Build a moat?
Or go full Grandpa and wire that thing like a DIY security system? Drop your answer in the comments, because trust me, by the end of this story, you're gonna want to pick a side. The first time it happened, Grandpa let it slide. He was sitting on his porch, again, that's where 80% of this man's life happens, and he saw one of the HOA patrols hop the fence like it was no big deal.
Grandpa yelled out, "Hey!
What do you think you're doing?" The patrol member waved a clipboard like it was some kind of golden ticket. "Just checking the property line, sir."
HOA business. HOA business?
Excuse me? Property lines are for surveyors, not clipboard crusaders. But Grandpa, being the patient man he was, decided not to start World War III. He just told them to scram. But here's the thing about HOAs. Once they taste a little power, they come back hungrier. Like raccoons in the garbage bin, they'll keep returning until you lock the lid.
And return they did. Again. And again.
Sometimes with cameras, sometimes with tape measures, sometimes just to snoop around and act like they were auditioning for the role of suburban sheriff. And that's when Grandpa said enough is enough. If they wanted to keep climbing the fence, fine, but the next time they did, they were in for the shock of their lives. Literally. Here's the part that makes this story legendary. Grandpa wasn't just your average porch philosopher. Back in the day he worked as, you guessed it, an electrician. Yep. The man spent decades wiring houses, fixing power outages, and teaching young apprentices why you should never lick a 9-volt battery. So when the HOA decided to turn his backyard into their personal playground, he knew exactly what to do. He set up a low-voltage deterrent system. Nothing dangerous, mind you, this wasn't some cartoon where people's skeletons light up like neon signs. Just enough current to give someone a zap they'd never forget.
The best part?
It was 100% legal. Grandpa did his homework. He called the city inspector, double-checked the code, and made sure his little setup was perfectly within the law.
Hoa du lek?
Sorry, but city code beats your power trip every time. So while the HOA was busy photocopying their 15th violation slip, Grandpa was busy wiring up his gate like a suburban version of Home Alone. Here's my question for you. Do you think Grandpa went too far? Or was this exactly the kind of clapback the HOA deserved? Because if you ask me, this was the neighborhood justice system working at its finest. Here's the part that makes this story legendary. Grandpa wasn't just your average porch philosopher. Back in the day he worked as, you guessed it, an electrician. Yep. The man spent decades wiring houses, fixing power outages, and teaching young apprentices why you should never lick a 9-volt battery. So when the HOA decided to turn his backyard into their personal playground, he knew exactly what to do. He set up a low-voltage deterrent system. Nothing dangerous, mind you, this wasn't some cartoon where people's skeletons light up like neon signs. Just enough current to give someone a zap they'd never forget.
The best part?
It was 100% legal. Grandpa did his homework. He called the city inspector, double-checked the code, and made sure his little setup was perfectly within the law. Sorry, but city code beats your power trip every time. So while the HOA was busy photocopying their 15th violation slip, Grandpa was busy wiring up his gate like a suburban version of Home Alone. Here's my question for you. Do you think Grandpa went too far? Or was this exactly the kind of clapback the HOA deserved? Because if you ask me, this was the neighborhood justice system working at its finest. By the time Grandpa finished his project, the man was practically giddy. He sat back on his porch, iced tea sweating in his hand, waiting for the show. And wouldn't you know it, the HOA patrol didn't disappoint. It was a Tuesday afternoon when they showed up. 2 of them this time, clipboards in hand, marching like mall cops on a mission. They circled the yard, whispering, pointing, and finally, one of them muttered, "Let's just hop it."
Bad move.
The second the patrol member's shoe touched the gate, zap. He yelped, dropped his clipboard, and stumbled back like he'd just stepped on a live wire.
Oh wait, he had.
Grandpa didn't even blink. Just took a long sip of his tea and said, "That'll be enough of that."
The neighbors?
They were loving it. Curtains pulled back, blinds tilted just enough to watch the drama unfold. One neighbor even whipped out a phone and recorded the whole thing. And within hours, the video was making rounds on Facebook. Caption, HOA gets shocked, literally. But if you think this is where the HOA tucked their tails and admitted defeat, oh no. This was just round 1. Because when petty people get embarrassed, they don't quit, they escalate. Now, you'd think after getting literally shocked off someone's property, the HOA would finally learn their lesson, right? Like, maybe they'd stop, take a walk, reevaluate their life choices, and ask themselves, wait, are we really climbing fences to measure picket heights? Is this what rock bottom looks like?
But no.
Instead, the HOA doubled down like a bad gambler in Vegas who's already mortgaged their house but still insists next hand's the one. The patrol member who got zapped? He stormed back to the HOA office like he'd just survived a bear attack. He was ranting about safety violations and illegal wiring, and threatening to sue. Of course, he left out the part where he was trespassing on private property like a raccoon that forgot his mask. So what did the HOA do? They held an emergency meeting. And you know when HOA boards hold emergency meetings, nothing good is coming. These people were frothing at the mouth, practically chanting. This is a matter of community safety. This is a hostile act. This could set a dangerous precedent. Dangerous precedent? You mean like, people actually standing up to HOA bullies?
Yeah, terrifying stuff.
So let me ask you, if your HOA got publicly humiliated and fried like a chicken nugget, do you think they'd back off? Or would they go full petty dictator and plot their revenge? Because spoiler alert, they chose option B. After their emergency meeting, the HOA decided they were going to hit Grandpa where it hurt. And no, not his porch chair, that thing was practically sacred. They started sending more violation letters.
Not 1. Not 2. Dozens.
Suddenly, everything was a problem. His lawn was half an inch too tall. His American flag was not regulation size. His mailbox was faded. His bird feeder was attracting non-native species. Yeah, apparently, HOA bylaws now extended to controlling which birds were allowed in the neighborhood. Somewhere, a pigeon union was fuming.
It became a war of paper.
Grandpa's mailbox was so stuffed with letters that the mailman started giving him the side eye, like, "Sir, are you okay? Do you need help?"
But Grandpa? He wasn't sweating. Nope.
He read every single letter, filed them neatly into a folder labeled nonsense, and went back to sipping tea on the porch. Because here's the thing, Grandpa knew something the HOA didn't.
He knew the law.
And while HOAs love to act like they're the law, they're really just glorified neighborhood clubs with too much free time. But if the HOA thought they could drown Grandpa in paperwork, they clearly underestimated two things: his patience and his sense of humor. And oh boy, that's when things started getting hilarious. Remember that video of the HOA guy getting shocked? Yeah, that thing went viral. By the next morning, it had been shared to every community group within a 50-mile radius. The captions ranged from HOA justice served to don't mess with Grandpa. Memes started popping up with Grandpa photoshopped as Thor, holding a lightning bolt, zapping HOA patrols like they were cartoon villains. Even the neighbors who usually stayed quiet were suddenly whispering, "You hear about the fence incident?" At backyard barbecues. Grandpa had unintentionally become a local folk hero. People were stopping by just to shake his hand. One teenager even made a TikTok dance inspired by the zap sound effect. Meanwhile, the HOA's credibility? Down the drain faster than a broken sprinkler system. Here's my question for you. Do you think this viral fame made the HOA back down out of embarrassment? Or did it just pour gasoline on their dumpster fire of pettiness? Because let me tell you, it was the latter. The HOA realized they were losing the PR war. So they decided to play dirty. If they couldn't beat Grandpa with fines or humiliation, they'd try to get the city involved. They filed a complaint claiming his electrified gate was a safety hazard. According to their version, Grandpa had rigged up some kind of death trap, just waiting to electrocute innocent children or small animals. So the city sent out an inspector. This poor guy showed up one morning, clipboard in hand, looking nervous like he'd just been told to wrestle an alligator. He introduced himself to Grandpa and asked to see the alleged hazard. Grandpa, being the gentleman he was, happily walked him over. He explained every wire, every switch, every voltage level. He showed him the safety cutoffs, the grounding, the compliance with city code. By the time he was done, the inspector was impressed.
Heck, he even took notes.
At one point he muttered, "This is cleaner wiring than some of the new homes I've inspected."
The verdict?
100% legal. The HOA's complaint was dismissed.
Grandpa? 1. HOA? 0. Again.
And if you think the HOA was mad before, oh, you haven't seen true suburban rage until a board full of Karens realizes their master plan just blew up in their face. At the next HOA meeting, things got heated. Board members were red-faced, pounding fists on the table, talking about taking back the neighborhood. One guy even suggested hiring private security to monitor Grandpa's property. Yes, you heard that right, they wanted to hire rent-a-cops to watch his fence. Another suggested raising everyone's dues to fund legal action. That went over about as well as a skunk at a garden party. Suddenly, even the HOA loyalists in the crowd started grumbling. Wait, you want to make us pay more money because you got zapped? Why don't you just leave him alone? This is embarrassing. The HOA was crumbling from the inside.
And Grandpa?
He wasn't even at the meeting. He was home, feet up, watching Jeopardy, completely unbothered. So, what do you think? Was this the beginning of the end for the HOA's grip on the neighborhood? Or did they have one last petty trick up their sleeve? Stick around, because the story only gets juicier from here. At this point, the HOA was desperate. Their reputation was in tatters, the community was laughing at them, and Grandpa had become the neighborhood's unofficial mascot of freedom.
So, what did they do?
They hired a lawyer. Now, not a good lawyer.
Oh no.
HOAs rarely spend money on quality. They went bargain bin, coupon clipping lawyer shopping. The kind of lawyer who runs ads at 2 a.m. during reruns of Judge Judy. Have you been electrocuted while trespassing?
Call now.
You may be entitled to absolutely nothing. This lawyer strutted into the neighborhood like he was about to take down the mob. He sent Grandpa a cease and desist letter, full of legal jargon designed to scare people. Words like litigation, injunction, and immediate compliance.
Grandpa?
He read it once, chuckled, and tucked it into his nonsense folder right next to the 57th HOA fine about his mailbox color. Then, he did something brilliant. He wrote back. His letter wasn't just legal, it was poetry. He quoted state statutes, property rights laws, and even tossed in a little Latin for flair. The kicker? He signed it with his full name and a little smiley face. The HOA lawyer? Radio silence. Turns out, he didn't actually want to fight someone who knew the law better than he did. So let's pause here. If you were the HOA, what would you do after getting roasted by an old man with a fountain pen?
Admit defeat?
or go full toddler meltdown in the candy aisle. Guess which one they chose? Since legal threats didn't work, the HOA decided to go for the old classic, intimidation. They started sending patrols past Grandpa's house more often. Not climbing the fence this time, nobody wanted a repeat of the lightning incident, but driving by slowly, glaring, taking pictures. At night, board members would casually walk their dogs past his property 3 or 4 times. Some even parked across the street and just sat there. To the HOA, this was intimidation. To Grandpa, it was free entertainment. He'd sit on his porch, lemonade in hand, wave at them cheerfully, and yell things like, "Smile for the camera. The internet loves you guys." Or, "Careful now, the fence bites." The neighbors were eating it up. Some even started bringing lawn chairs to Grandpa's yard to watch the HOA circus unfold. At one point, it turned into a block party. Hot dogs, music, and everyone waiting for the next HOA patrol to show up like it was a sitcom episode. But just when it looked like the HOA couldn't embarrass themselves anymore, they pulled out their next move, and it backfired spectacularly.
That's right, they called the cops. Their complaint? Dangerous property modifications and hostile behavior.
Basically, they wanted Grandpa arrested for having a gate with personality. The officers showed up one afternoon, looking tired. Clearly, this wasn't their first HOA rodeo. They knocked on Grandpa's door, and he invited them in like old friends. He offered them iced tea, sat them down, and explained the situation. When they asked to see the gate, Grandpa obliged. He walked them through every wire, every safety measure, every legal code he'd followed. By the end of it, one officer literally said, "Sir, this is cleaner work than the city's own equipment." The police left shaking their heads, muttering about Karens wasting taxpayer dollars. But here's the kicker. The whole exchange was caught on a neighbor's doorbell camera and uploaded online. Within 24 hours, the video had 1 million views under the title, "HOA calls cops. Cops end up complimenting Grandpa's fence."
Cue the memes. Cue the mockery.
Cue the HOA's blood pressure skyrocketing. So at this point, the HOA was backed into a corner. They'd failed with fines, failed with lawyers, failed with intimidation, and now failed with the cops.
So wat du desperate, cornered HOAs du?
They go nuclear. The board decided that if existing bylaws couldn't stop Grandpa, they'd just write new ones. They proposed an amendment banning electrified property barriers, clearly targeting Grandpa's fence. But here's the thing, by this time, the entire neighborhood was fed up with the HOA's antics. At the meeting where the vote was supposed to happen, dozens of neighbors showed up. Not to support the HOA.
To support Grandpa.
People wore t-shirts that said, "Fence Lives Matter." Someone brought a sign that read, "Keep the shock, lose the HOA." When the board tried to push their amendment through, the crowd erupted. One neighbor shouted, "How about you stop wasting our money on personal vendettas?" Another said, "If you hate the fence so much, maybe you should stop trespassing." The amendment failed.
Miserably.
The HOA president left the meeting red as a tomato, storming off while muttering about ungrateful residents. And here's the thing about power. Once people see the bully bleed, they stop being afraid. The HOA had just shown weakness, and the whole neighborhood smelled it. Now, Grandpa could have stopped there.
He'd already won, right?
The HOA was humiliated, the neighbors adored him, and the fence was safe. But Grandpa wasn't just playing defense, he was playing chess. He filed an official complaint against the HOA for harassment. He gathered every violation letter, every false report, every intimidation tactic, and handed it to a lawyer friend. Within weeks, the HOA was under investigation for misuse of funds and abuse of authority. Turns out, all those legal threats and emergency meetings,
they weren't cheap.
And they hadn't exactly been transparent with the budget. The board was now facing fines of their own.
And the president?
Rumor had it, she was considering stepping down before things got worse. So, is this where the story ends? Grandpa sipping tea on his porch, HOA in shambles, justice served? Or is there one final twist in this suburban saga? Stick around, because part 4 is where things get downright legendary. At first, neighbors were cautiously supportive of Grandpa. They admired his guts but didn't want to stick their necks out too far. After all, everyone feared the HOA. They were like the mean lunch lady who always had extra peas ready for anyone who complained. But the HOA overplayed their hand. By constantly targeting Grandpa, they exposed themselves. People started realizing, wait a second, if they're willing to break into his yard, what stops them from coming into mine? And once that seed was planted,
Boom. Unity.
Soon, Grandpa wasn't the only one showing up at HOA meetings with a folder of receipts. Other residents came armed with their own stories.
VHY, dit ju fein $50 for leaving my trash, bin out wen se trejura lives hers auto.
Where exactly is our money going? Because this year's landscaping budget looks like a down payment on a Ferrari. Why are the rules about holiday lights different for board members? The HOA board looked like deer in headlights. Their grip on the community was crumbling. And here's the thing about bullies: the moment one person fights back, everyone else remembers they've had fists all along. This wasn't just Grandpa's fight anymore, it was a neighborhood revolution. The president, let's call her Karen Prime, was unraveling. She had built her empire on fear, fines, and passive-aggressive newsletters.
But now?
Every attempt to assert control was met with laughter.
She tried to double fines.
People ignored them. She sent out sternly worded letters. Residents turned them into memes. One neighbor even printed her letter on a t-shirt and wore it to the next HOA meeting. It read, "Failure to remove your lawn gnome may result in legal action." The room erupted in laughter. Karen Prime nearly fainted. Her authority was evaporating in real time, and she knew it. That's when she made her biggest mistake yet. She tried to threaten Grandpa personally. It arrived in a red envelope, stamped urgent. Inside was a letter dripping with rage. Failure to remove your electrified fence will result in foreclosure proceedings.
This is your Finalwarnung.
Grandpa read it, smirked, and handed it to his lawyer. Here's the thing the HOA forgot: you can't just foreclose on someone's property because you don't like their fence. The law doesn't work that way. In fact, by sending such a letter, they just committed what lawyers love to call a very big oopsie. Grandpa's lawyer wasted no time. He filed a counterclaim for harassment, abuse of power, and fraudulent threats. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't holding the leash, they were the ones being dragged into court. And if you thought Grandpa was dangerous behind a lemonade glass, wait until you see him in a courtroom. This wasn't a defense, it was a demolition. The day of the hearing felt like a movie premiere. Neighbors showed up like it was a field trip, packing the courtroom pews.
Some even brought popcorn.
Karen Prime strutted in with her bargain bin lawyer, trying to look confident. Grandpa walked in calmly, wearing a suit older than the HOA itself, carrying a leather briefcase stuffed with evidence. The judge opened with, "So let me get this straight. The HOA entered this man's property without permission, got shocked by a legally installed fence, called the police, and now they're threatening foreclosure?" Karen Prime's lawyer mumbled something about community safety. Grandpa's lawyer, meanwhile, went full scorched earth. He presented timelines, video evidence, copies of every ridiculous fine, and testimonies from neighbors.
The cherry on top?
The viral video of the police complimenting Grandpa's fence.
The courtroom laughed.
Even the judge cracked a smile. By the end, the HOA's case was in ashes. The judge dismissed their claims, sanctioned the HOA for harassment, and ordered them to pay Grandpa's legal fees. Karen Prime?
She turned white as a sheet.
Her little empire was collapsing. Now, most people would have stopped there. A clean win, legal fees covered, HOA humiliated. But Grandpa? Oh no, he wasn't done yet. He was about to turn victory into legend.
Word spread.
Grandpa wasn't just a man with a fence anymore, he was a symbol. A suburban folk hero. Local news ran the headline: "Retired veteran defeats HOA, electrified fence sparks community rebellion." Memes flooded social media. Grandpa photoshopped as Thor, holding a lightning bolt. Karen Prime edited into a cartoon villain. The phrase "don't mess with the porch" trending online. Kids in the neighborhood started biking past his house, saluting him like he was a general. Adults brought him pies and thanked him for saving the community. Grandpa, of course, took it all in stride. He didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. He just smiled, sipped his iced tea, and said, "Told you the porch was the best seat in the house." But every story needs a finale. The question is, how do you end a war with an HOA?
With revenge?
With destruction? Or with something even more powerful? The court ruling didn't just end the case, it detonated the HOA's credibility. Overnight, their power disintegrated. Members of the board resigned one by one, each blaming miscommunication or Karen Prime's leadership style. Karen Prime herself? She vanished from community events, her once iron grip reduced to whispered gossip. The same people who once feared her now mocked her. Her red envelopes became collector's items, pinned on refrigerators like comedy posters. But the real impact wasn't on her, it was on the neighborhood. With the HOA crippled, residents suddenly felt free. Holiday decorations popped up like fireworks. Kids set up lemonade stands without fear of a $25 commercial use fine. People painted their fences, planted flowers, and actually talked to each other again. The community wasn't just surviving, it was thriving.
And the best part?
The very thing the HOA hated most, Grandpa's fence, became the symbol of the neighborhood's freedom. Funny how karma works with a side of 120 volts. At first, neighbors stopped by just to thank Grandpa. But soon, his porch became something bigger. It turned into the unofficial town square. On warm evenings, people would bring lawn chairs, sweet tea, and stories. Grandpa would sit at the center, rocking gently, listening more than he talked. He wasn't interested in glory, he was interested in community. One neighbor joked, "Forget the HOA, we've got the GPA, Grandpa Porch Association."
The name stuck.
Kids drew signs, adults made t-shirts, and before long, the GPA was a real thing. A community group dedicated to fairness, transparency, and respect.
No fines.
No power trips. Just neighbors helping neighbors. But here's the twist. Grandpa's fight wasn't really about a fence, or even the HOA. It was about something deeper. And this is where the story turns from hilarious to profound. One evening, a reporter asked him, "Why did you go to such lengths? Why fight so hard?" Grandpa leaned back, looked out over his yard and said, "Because home is supposed to be a safe place. Not just for me, for everyone. When someone tries to take that away, you stand your ground. Not because you hate them, but because you love what you're protecting." The crowd around him went silent. It wasn't about revenge or humiliation, or even the electrified gate. It was about principle. About community. About refusing to let bullies, whether they wear a badge, a suit, or a name tag that says HOA President, decide how you live your life. That line became a rallying cry. Neighbors repeated it. The local paper printed it. Online, people shared it with captions like, "Protect your porch. Protect your people." Just when it seemed like the story was over, the HOA tried one last desperate move. A handful of bored loyalists filed an appeal, hoping to overturn the ruling. But by now, the tide of public opinion was a tidal wave. News outlets picked up the story. Talk radio hosts turned it into comedy fodder. Late-night TV even ran a segment titled, "The Electrified Fence That Shocked America." The appeal didn't last 5 minutes in court. The judge dismissed it, warning the HOA that further harassment could result in criminal charges. That was it. Game over. So, what happens when the dragon is slain, the villain defeated, and the porch reclaimed? That's when you see the real ending, one that outlives the fight itself. Years later, people still talked about it. The fence was no longer electrified. Grandpa turned it off after the court victory. But nobody ever tried to climb it again. Not out of fear, but out of respect. The GPA, Grandpa Porch Association, became a model for other neighborhoods. Communities reached out, asking how they could create their own resident-led groups without the bureaucracy and bullying of HOAs.
And Grandpa?
He never sought recognition. But recognition found him. The city gave him a Community Spirit Award. Local schools invited him to speak about standing up for what's right. Veterans groups saluted his grit. But if you asked him about it, he'd just chuckle and say, "I just wanted to enjoy my porch." And here's the kicker. Sometimes the smallest stand creates the biggest ripple.
A fence. A porch. A rocking chair.
That's all it took to topple years of bullying and remind a community who really holds the power, the people. Picture it, Grandpa on his porch at sunset, iced tea in hand, the neighborhood alive around him. Kids laughing. Dogs barking. Neighbors waving. He looks out, smiles, and says, "Funny thing about fences. They're supposed to keep people out.
But this one?
It brought everyone in." Fade to black.